Usually when we talk about history, there's this expectation of cold objectivity. Like, we treat it almost like a security camera mounted on a wall.
Right, yeah, like it's just recording.
Exactly. A kingdom falls, an empire collapses, and the camera just records the rubble. And then the historian points at the Grady footage and says, there it is. That's exactly what happened. Here are the dates, the casualties, the literal sequence of events.
It's a very modern craving, actually. I mean, we want our timelines to be completely sterile. We want the past categorized perfectly because, honestly, it gives us this sort of illusion of control over the present.
But then you step into the world of ancient texts, specifically the biblical books of history, and suddenly that security camera just shatters. Or, well, rather, you realize the person holding the camera isn't a passive observer at all.
No, not even close.
They are an artist, or a theologian, a philosopher even. And the historical landscape we're looking at through their lens is incredibly, meticulously curated.
Right. Which is exactly why we are unpacking the ancient text of 2 Chronicles today in this deep dive.
Yeah, and for you listening, to a casual reader, this might seem like just a dusty, repetitive history book, right? Like it's just detailing long-dead kings of a tiny agrarian kingdom in the Middle East.
Yeah, but underneath that surface layer, it is arguably one of the most sophisticated, profound pieces of literature on how to survive, the total collapse of your society.
So imagine stepping into the rubble of literally everything you've ever known. That's the premise here. If we look at the book that precedes this era in the biblical narrative, 2 Kings, that book is essentially a grim, unvarnished autopsy report.
That's a great way to put it, an autopsy report.
Right. It's this meticulous detailing of how a nation completely destroyed itself. It lists the idolatry, the political blunders, the betrayals, and it ends with the nation just in a body bag. But 2 Chronicles is the physical therapy plan for the survivors.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's for the people who are waking up after the apocalypse, looking at their paralyzed institutions, and just trying to figure out how to walk again.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. The author, who scholars usually just call the chronicler, they know exactly what they were doing here. I mean, this is not bare history. It's what we call a theological historical narrative. It has a very specific, fiercely urgent agenda.
And what is that agenda?
Well, the entire sprawling architecture of this book is designed to answer one haunting, really existential question for its original audience, which is, are we still God's people?
Wow.
Are we still God's people? I mean, put yourself in their shoes for a second. To understand why that question was so heavy, we really have to look at the massive crisis they were living through.
Exactly. You have to look at the timeline.
So we are talking about the late Persian period, somewhere between 515 and 400 BCE. Your ancestors were conquered. The massive golden temple built by King Solomon, which was literally the absolute center of your universe, it was burned to the ground by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. Yeah, completely leveled.
The brightest minds, the royals, the artisans, they were all dragged away into exile.
And you have to remember, you lose your land, you lose your king, you lose your temple. In the ancient Near East, that didn't just mean you lost a war. It meant your god had been defeated.
Right.
It meant your entire identity was erased.
But then, decades later, there's this plot twist. The Persian Empire conquers Babylon, and a king named Cyrus issues a decree basically saying, you can go home, go rebuild.
So you walk hundreds of miles back to Jerusalem, and what do you find?
Rubble. Just miles and miles of devastating ruins. And that is exactly where the profound identity crisis sets in.
Yeah.
The community that returns, which is known as Yahud, they are incredibly fragile. I mean, they are no longer a powerful sovereign kingdom. They're an insignificant, tiny province under the crushing thumb of the Persian Empire.
So they're struggling to validate their own worship, basically.
Exactly. They are holding on to these ancient cosmic promises made to King David that his royal line would rule forever. But there is no Davidic king on the throne. Oh, man.
So they are looking around at the dirt and asking, did the exile permanently sever our relationship with the divine? Like, did we break the covenant so badly that there is just no coming back?
So who steps up to answer that? Like, who writes the physical therapy plan for a traumatized nation?
Well, that is actually a subject of intense historical debate.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If you look at traditional Jewish views, they often link the authorship of Chronicles to Ezra, the famous priest and scribe who helped lead the return.
Okay, that makes sense.
But modern historical analysis leans more toward an anonymous post-exilic compiler or perhaps even a sort of school of writers living in Jerusalem around 400 BCE.
I know there's a strong theory that the primary author was a Levite, right? Like specifically a temple musician.
Yes, absolutely. The text has this undeniable intense fixation on the mechanics of worship. I mean, the choirs, the stringed instruments, the specific duties of the gatekeepers and the priests.
Yeah, gets super detailed.
It really reads like someone who deeply understood the internal plumbing of the temple's daily life. They have what we call profound cultic concerns. And when historians say cultic, they don't mean, a fringe group drinking poison.
Right.
They mean the organized physical system of religious ritual and liturgy.
I just love that visual, honestly. Like
Mm-hmm.
a temple musician, someone whose entire life is literally dedicated to harmony and structure, just sitting down amidst the chaotic ruins of their country to write a definitive history.
Yeah, orchestrating order out of national dissonance.
Exactly. And they're speaking to a very specific culture here. This was an honor-shame society. Social stability relied entirely on family lineage, patronage, covenant loyalty. If your lineage was broken, you were nothing.
Which makes the chronicler's central rhetorical move so radical. Throughout this massive document, the author repeatedly, aggressively addresses all Israel.
Wait, even though the northern tribes of Israel had been wiped out centuries earlier?
Yes, exactly. The northern kingdom was obliterated by Assyria long before the Babylonians ever showed up. The returning exiles are mostly just from the southern tribe of Judah.
Wow.
They are a battered fraction of a fraction. But the chronicler insists, both sociologically and theologically, no, you are all Israel.
That is a bold claim.
It is a bold, defiant claim. The author is basically telling this traumatized little group, you are not a historical dead end. You are not a failed remnant. You are the true, unbroken continuation of the covenant people. The promises made to the massive, unified empire of your ancestors belong entirely to you.
Okay, but this is where I really struggle and where I think anyone with a modern mindset is going to push back.
Okay, let's hear it.
To make that bold claim, the chronicler is taking the older, established historical records, like the books of Samuel and Kings, and heavily editing them. They were literally cutting out massive, embarrassing stories. They are expanding on other things that barely got a mention before. They are fundamentally reshaping the narrative. I mean, if I'm reading a history of a modern presidency and the biographer just deletes the parts where the president committed a massive crime, we call that revisionism. We call it political propaganda. So how is this any different?
It is a totally valid pushback. I get it. If you judge an ancient text by the standards of a 21st century journalistic fact checker, it absolutely looks like manipulation.
Right.
But we have to fundamentally shift our understanding of what history writing actually meant in the ancient world. They weren't trying to provide a sterile, exhaustive data dump. They were writing to construct meaning.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot view the differences between Kings and Chronicles as mere errors or like a cover-up.
Mm-hmm.
It is deliberate, overt theological shaping.
It reminds me of how a brilliant documentary filmmaker operates.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Like, say you were directing a documentary about a famous musician. You have thousands of hours of raw footage, interviews, backstage arguments, concert footage. You don't just put a 6-month unedited video file on a screen and call it a movie.
No, nobody would watch that.
Exactly. You choose which clips to include. You choose where to put the dramatic music. You might completely ignore the musician's messy divorce if your documentary is specifically about their impact on the evolution of jazz. You are selecting true facts, but you are arranging them to teach a very specific lesson.
That is the perfect framework. The chronicler is the documentary filmmaker. They are looking at the raw footage of Israel's past, and they have a very specific thesis.
Right.
That covenant blessing and national restoration only come through seeking God, honoring the temple, and remaining faithful. To prove that thesis to a desperate audience, they curate the footage. They want to show that exile is not the final word.
Let's look at how heavy-handed this documentary editing actually gets.
Yeah.
Because it becomes glaringly obvious when the chronicler focuses on the Golden Age,
Yeah.
the reign of King Solomon, and the construction of the temple.
The structural center of gravity in 2 Chronicles is undeniable. The first 9 chapters of the book are just a monument to Solomon. He is presented as the liturgical ideal.
And his story kicks off with this fascinating, almost mythical moment at a high place called Gibeon.
Yes.
Solomon has just ascended the throne, the nation is on a nice edge, and God appears to him and essentially hands him a blank check. Ask what I shall give you.
which is a terrifying amount of power if you think about it.
Right. If you hand a new politician a blank check, they're going to ask for the destruction of their rivals or an overflowing treasury or just an invincible military.
Naturally.
But Solomon doesn't ask for any of that. He asks for wisdom and knowledge to govern.
And by starting there, the chronicler immediately establishes the ultimate model of leadership. Solomon eventually acquires unimaginable wealth and military power, but the text is so careful to present those things as secondary. They are merely the byproduct of his initial primary pursuit, which was the wisdom to recognize his dependence on divine governance.
But the camera doesn't linger on his wealth or his chariots. The vast majority of these 9 chapters is an excruciatingly detailed blueprint of the temple.
Oh, it really is.
The dimensions, the bronze work, the cedar beams, the gold overlays, the specific garments of the priests. Why? Why force a traumatized group of survivors living in dirt to read architectural plans of a building they can never perfectly recreate?
To understand that, we really have to look at the original Hebrew vocabulary being deployed here. It completely shifts the paradigm. The word used over and over for the temple is Beit.
Beit, which usually just translates to house, right? Or household.
Yes, but in the theological ecosystem of Chronicles, it is so much more than a physical structure of stone and wood. The Beit is the intercepting point of heaven and earth.
Wow.
It is the specific place where God's name physically dwells. The chronicler is arguing that the entire purpose of a king, like the entire goal of human governance, isn't to build an empire. It is to establish the Beit.
So the physical building matters because...
Because it is the authorized locus of divine mercy. It is the one place where a broken people can go to be healed.
And the existence of the Beit brings us to another massive theological concept in the text. The Hebrew word manucha. It gets translated as rest.
Which is honestly a terribly anemic translation in English. We hear rest and we think of taking a nap on a Sunday or going on vacation to escape our jobs.
Exactly. But for a community that has just survived warfare, starvation, deportation, and enslavement, rest isn't a nap.
Not at all. Manuch as a profound, active state of covenantal order. It signifies absolute security. It means stability and peace under God's governance. It means you can plant a vineyard and actually live long enough to drink the wine without an invading army burning it down. When the temple is functioning properly and the king is faithful, the entire land experiences Manucha. It is the literal antithesis of the chaos of exile.
So Solomon builds this house of rest. And the dedication sequence in chapters 5 through 7, I mean, it's cinematic. It's a complete sensory overload.
It really is.
They bring the ancient Ark of the Covenant into the inner sanctuary. You have thousands of priests in white linen. You have a massive orchestra with cymbals, harps, and trumpets. They are singing in unison. And the text says fire literally comes down from heaven. And the glory of the Lord fills the house so densely that the priests can't even stand up to do their jobs.
It is the ultimate visible validation of the sacred space. God has accepted the Beit, and in the immediate aftermath of that overwhelming event, God speaks to Solomon at night. And he delivers what is arguably the most programmatic foundational verse in the entire book, 2 Chronicles 7.14.
Yeah, if anyone listening has ever spent time in a church, they have likely heard this verse quoted. God says, "If my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, that I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land."
That single sentence is the master key to the entire book.
Wow.
It compresses the chronicler's entire theology into one explicit if-in equation. Humble, pray, seek, turn. If those 4 conditions are met, the inevitable result is divine response, forgiveness, and healing.
But hold on, here's where I have to call out the documentary filmmaker again.
Yeah.
Because the edit here is staggering.
I know where you're going with this.
I know the story of Solomon from the book of 1 Kings. His life does not end with a glorious, faithful temple. It ends in a catastrophic, tragic failure.
Yeah, it's a huge mess.
He marries hundreds of foreign women to secure political alliances. To appease them, he literally builds altars to foreign gods, gods of child sacrifice and fertility cults, right on the hills overlooking the Beit he just dedicated.
Yep.
He fractures his own kingdom through oppressive taxation and forced labor. It's a massive, undeniable moral collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And the chronicler? Well, the chronicler says absolutely nothing about it.
Complete silence.
Not a single word. How does that not completely destroy the author's credibility with the audience?
Yeah.
Everyone reading this new Solomon failed. It was the reason the kingdom split.
So by whitewashing Solomon, isn't the chronicler just insulting the intelligence of the survivors?
If the goal was to write a historically balanced biography of a flawed man, yes, it would be an insult. But remember the genre here. This is temple theology.
Yeah, right. Right.
If you are writing a survival manual on how to reconstruct a society from the ashes, you have to establish the ideal blueprint first. In Chronicles, Solomon is not functioning as a historical man with a mixed legacy. He functions as an archetype. He is the ultimate idealized temple builder.
So, by omitting the apostasy, the author refuses to let the audience get distracted by the man's personal failures. They want the reader's gaze locked dead center on the glorious potential of the temple and the absolute necessity of seeking God. Precisely. You cannot explain how a machine breaks until you show how the machine was perfectly designed to work. The failures, the corruption, the idolatry, that will all be explored in excruciating detail in the chapters to come. But the foundation, the memory of what was possible, must remain pure.
Okay, that makes sense. You build the flawless architecture of hope before you show the earthquake.
Exactly.
And the earthquake hits almost immediately. Solomon dies, and his son Rehoboam takes the throne in chapter 10. And Rehoboam is basically a case study in toxic ego.
Oh, absolutely.
The people come to him and say, "Your father taxed us into poverty. Lighten our load and we will serve you." And Rehoboam, listening to his young, arrogant buddies instead of the wise elders, basically says, "My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. You thought my dad was harsh. Just wait."
It is a disastrously foolish political miscalculation, and the immediate result is the shattering of the nation. The 10 northern tribes secede. They form the nation of Israel, leaving only the tiny southern tribe of Judah, with the capital of Jerusalem, under the control of the Davidic king.
And from this exact point forward, the Chronicler makes another huge editorial choice. They basically ignore the northern kingdom completely.
They do. Just drop it.
A camera locks onto the southern kingdom of Judah. And over the next few centuries, we get a roller coaster of kings. Some are brilliant reformers. Some are absolute monsters. But the author doesn't just list them. They evaluate every single one using a very strict moral calculus.
To decode that moral calculus, we have to look at the 3 foundational Hebrew verbs that drive the entire rest of the narrative. These words are like the operating system of 2 Chronicles.
Okay, let's unpack those.
The first and most important is darash.
Darash, what does it literally mean?
It translates to seek, inquire, or require, but we have to elevate that beyond our modern usage. If I lose my car keys, I seek them. That's not what darash means.
Right, it's not playing hide and seek with a distant deity.
No. In the chronicler's worldview, darash is the programmatic, active term for covenant faithfulness. To seek the Lord means to completely reorient your entire national, political, and personal life around God's law.
It means sunding the temple. It means enforcing justice. It means trusting YHWH for military defense instead of making shady alliances. It is an all-encompassing posture of dependence.
But then you have the polar opposite of darash. You have the word azav.
Azav, to leave, to forsake, to completely abandon.
This is the ultimate treason.
It is the exact mechanism of collapse. When a king decides he no longer needs the covenant, when he actively introduces foreign worship or relies entirely on his own military genius, he commits azav. And the theology of Chronicles is brutal in its consistency here. Forsaking God inevitably, mechanically brings judgment. The protective hedge is removed, and the chaos of the world rushes in.
Which would be incredibly depressing if it weren't for the third word, the bridge. The emergency exit from azav, the word is kana.
Kana, to humble, to subdue oneself, to literally bend the knee.
So the calculus works like this. Sin and pride lead to a king forsaking God, which is azav. God responds with judgment, maybe an invasion, a plague, or an economic collapse. The king is forced to his knees, kana.
From that posture of humility, he begins to seek God again, darash. And God responds with deliverance and healing. It's the exact formula from 2 Chronicles 7.14 played out in real time.
Let's look at how this actually functions in the dirt and blood of history, because the text gives us these incredible layered character studies of leaders succeeding and failing within this exact system.
Let's start with the ultimate anti-model, the warning label on the bottle. King Ahaz in chapter 28. If you want to know how to destroy a country from the inside out, you study Ahaz.
Ahaz is a portrait of catastrophic, unrelenting azav. He completely forsakes the Lord. But what makes Ahaz so uniquely destructive is that his apostasy isn't a private, personal failing. He weaponizes it. He dismantles the very infrastructure of the nation's spiritual life.
The text says he literally shuts the doors of the temple. He boards up the bait. And we have to think about what that meant practically. The temple wasn't just a church you visited for an hour on Sunday.
No, not at all.
It was the central bank. It was the Supreme Court, it was the national slaughterhouse, and the heart of the agrarian economy. By shutting those doors, Ahaz wasn't just making a religious statement. He was severing the central nervous system of Judah. He cuts off the daily sacrifices that maintained the covenant order.
And he replaces it with chaos. He imitates the horrific cultic practices of the surrounding nations, including child sacrifice. He builds altars on every street corner in Jerusalem. He is actively defying the minutiae, the rest that God promised.
And the result is immediate devastation. The nation completely collapses under military pressure from Syria, from Israel, from Edom. Hundreds of thousands are killed or taken captive. Ahaz proves that when a leader actively chooses Azov and refuses to humble himself, refuses to kana, the whole ship goes down with him.
But Ahaz is almost too easy to analyze because he's so overtly, cartoonishly evil.
Yeah, he's the obvious bad guy.
The Chronicler provides a much more terrifying warning in a king named Uzziah in chapter 26. Uzziah is what we might call a tragic success.
Yes. Uzziah's story is fascinating. He actually starts out as a phenomenal leader. The text explicitly says he sought God, Darash. And because he sought God, God made him prosper. He's an engineering and military genius. He invents new siege engines to shoot arrows and great stones from the towers of Jerusalem. He builds up the agricultural wealth of the nation, digging wells and planting vineyards. He secures the borders. For decades, he is the picture of a successful, thriving king.
But that immense compounding prosperity becomes a psychological trap. The text delivers a chilling diagnosis. It says, "But when he was strong, he grew proud to his destruction." He forgets the posture of Kana. He starts to believe his own press clippings.
He assumes that because he has ultimate political and military authority, he must also have ultimate spiritual authority.
Yeah.
So one day, Uzziah walks into the temple, not just the courtyards where the kings are allowed, but into the holy place, which is strictly the domain of the consecrated priests, the descendants of Aaron. And Uzziah decides he is going to burn incense on the golden altar himself.
We really have to unpack the political and theological violation happening here. Uzziah is attempting to merge the crown and the priesthood. He is trying to absorb the sacred into the state.
Wow.
He believes his power gives him the right to rewrite the ancient boundaries of holy space. And 80 priests bravely stand in his way and tell him to get out, warning him that it will bring him no honor.
And Uzziah gets furious. He's standing there holding a censer of incense, raging at the priests for daring to tell the king what he cannot do. And right in that moment, the text says leprosy breaks out on his forehead.
The physical manifestation of his internal corruption. In the ancient world, a skin disease like leprosy rendered you ritually impure. You could not enter the temple. You could not participate in the community.
The priests don't even have to fight him. When Uzziah realizes he is struck with leprosy, he actually hurries to get out of the temple himself. He is terrified.
Yeah, the panic sets in.
And this massively successful, brilliant king lives the entire rest of his life in total isolation, in a separate house, quarantined. He is cut off from the house of the Lord, cut off from his people, and his son has to govern in his place.
Uzziah's tragedy is a profound warning to the returning exiles. It proves that success is arguably more dangerous than failure. In the Chronicler's worldview, success tempts transgression. The true measure of a leader isn't their GDP or the invincibility of their military. It's whether they have the discipline to maintain their lane, honor the holy boundaries, and keep their heart in a constant posture of seeking.
It's the danger of finishing poorly. Which brings us to another mixed bag of a king, Asa, in chapters 14 through 16. Asa starts incredibly strong. He leads a massive covenant renewal. He rallies the people. He even faces a terrifying invasion by an Ethiopian army of 1 million men.
1 million men.
And Asa doesn't rely on tactics. He prays, he relies on God, and he wins a miraculous victory.
He's the poster child for Darash.
But 36 years into his reign, he faces another threat. The northern kingdom of Israel blockades his trade routes. And this time, instead of praying, Asa panics. He goes into the temple treasury, takes the silver and gold, and sends it to the pagan king of Syria to buy a military alliance. He hires a mercenary army to attack his own brothers in the north.
From a purely Machiavellian political standpoint, it was a brilliant move. It worked. The blockade was lifted. But from the perspective of covenantal governance, it was high treason. He trusted his geopolitical maneuvering instead of trusting YHWH.
A prophet comes to him and basically says, "You relied on God against 1 million men. But now you're relying on a Syrian king. You have acted foolishly." And instead of repenting, instead of bending the knee, Asa is enraged. He throws the prophet into prison and starts brutally oppressing his own people.
Yeah, he just doubles down.
He finishes his life diseased in his feet, stubbornly refusing to seek the Lord even for healing, turning only to physicians. He dies bitter and estranged from the covenant.
So we have Ahaz the apostate, Uzziah the arrogant, and Asa the pragmatist. The Chronicler is showing us every possible way the human heart drifts from dependence.
But hold on. When I look at this formula, seek God and prosper, forsake God and suffer, humble yourself and be restored, I can totally hear the skepticism from a modern listener.
Oh, for sure.
If I'm reading this, it sounds like the Chronicler is just preaching an ancient version of the prosperity gospel. It sounds like a cosmic karma vending machine. You put in a prayer token, you pull the lever of humility, and the machine dispenses a military victory or an economic boom. If you sin, the machine dispenses a plague. Is the universe really that mechanical?
It's a very common and honestly a very dangerous misconception of the text. The logic of Chronicles is explicitly not mechanical prosperity theology. If it were a vending machine, the human king would essentially be in control, right? Do X, force God to do Y.
Right.
But the text insists on what we call covenantal governance.
Okay, break that down. How is covenantal governance different from karma?
Well, karma is a blind, impersonal force of cause and effect. A vending machine is an unthinking mechanism, but in Chronicles, the kings are dealing with a fiercely personal, holy God. The outcomes, whether it's blessing or judgment, are the deliberate, sovereign responses of a God who is passionately, emotionally committed to maintaining the integrity of his relationship with his people. God governs history. If a king suffers defeat, it is not because the gods of Assyria were stronger. It is because YHWH actively orchestrated the defeat to discipline his son. The power dynamic is entirely relational, not mechanical.
And this isn't just an abstract theological debate happening in the safety of a temple courtyard. This moral calculus gets put to the absolute, ultimate, terrifying geopolitical test in the real world. This isn't just theory. This is survival. Let's look at the climax of this dynamic. Let's look at King Hezekiah and the Assyrian crisis of 701 BCE.
Chapters 29 through 32 of 2 Chronicles represent the narrative peak of reform in the entire book. Hezekiah inherits a total unmitigated disaster from his father, Ahaz. Remember, Ahaz had literally nailed the temple doors shut.
Hezekiah comes to power, and he doesn't waste a second. In the very first month of his reign, he orders the temple doors opened and repaired. He commands the priests to haul out decades of accumulated filth and idolatrous objects.
It's a massive cleanup operation.
He completely overhauls the national worship system. He restores the massive festival of Passover, and he even sends letters into the conquered northern territories, begging the scattered survivors to come to Jerusalem and worship. It is the most breathtaking, comprehensive revival of Darash, of seeking God, in the nation's history.
It is a spiritual zenith. But the brutal reality of the ancient Near East doesn't care about your spiritual zenith. Just as Hezekiah finishes this massive restoration, the most lethal, terrifying superpower on the face of the earth turns its gaze toward Jerusalem. The Assyrian Empire, led by King Sennacherib, marches into Judah.
This is where my inner history nerd just totally loses it.
Yeah.
Because we are not just relying on a theological text here. We actually have the archaeological receipts to prove exactly what happened.
We do. It's incredible.
We can cross-reference the Bible with the enemy's own war logs. This isn't a myth. This is concrete late 8th century BCE history playing out.
The external, extra-biblical anchors for this specific event are astonishing. They give us a visceral sense of the terror Hezekiah was facing.
Let's start with the Sennacherib prism. It's this beautiful hexagonal clay artifact, totally covered in microscopic cuneiform writing, currently sitting in the British Museum. It is the official royal annals of the Assyrian king Sennacherib. And right there, baked into the clay, he boasts about his 701 BCE campaign against Judah.
Yeah, he explicitly names King Hezekiah.
He brags about destroying 46 of Judah's fortified cities. He lists the staggering amount of gold and silver he extracted as tribute. And he famously writes that he trapped Hezekiah in Jerusalem like a bird in a cage. It is absolute, irrefutable corroboration of the biblical setting.
But the prism is just the written boast. To understand the psychological warfare, you have to look at the Lachish reliefs.
Yes. Also in the British Museum. These are massive, floor-to-ceiling stone carvings that Sennacherib had installed in his palace in Nineveh. Lachish was Judah's second most important city. It was a massive, heavily fortified stronghold protecting the approach to Jerusalem.
And these stone reliefs are masterpieces of ancient visual propaganda. They are designed to terrify anyone who walks into the throne room.
They show the reality of an Assyrian siege. You can see the Assyrian soldiers building massive earthen ramps up to the walls of Lachish. You see the siege engines, these ancient tanks with battering rams, smashing the brickwork. You see the defenders of Lachish throwing torches down on the machines. But then you see the aftermath.
Yeah, the aftermath is brutal.
The reliefs vividly depict the Assyrians impaling Jewish leaders alive on stakes outside the city. You see lines of emaciated, terrified civilians being forced into deportation, carrying whatever meager possessions they could grab.
Now put yourself in Hezekiah's shoes. You are sitting behind the walls of Jerusalem. You know exactly what just happened at Lachish. You know what the Assyrians do to kings who rebel. The smell of smoke is in the air. You are staring down the barrel of an undefeated, merciless military machine.
And the chronicler gives us a brilliant detail about how Hezekiah responds. He doesn't just sit in the temple and wait for a miracle. He acts with profound, desperate engineering prudence. The text says he takes counsel with his commanders and decides to cut off the water supply outside the city so the besieging Assyrian army will die of thirst.
It's a massive undertaking. He stops up the springs and the brooks that flow through the land, but a city under siege still needs water to survive, so he initiates one of the most incredible public works projects of the ancient world.
Hezekiah's Tunnel. You can still literally walk through it today in Jerusalem. It's a tunnel carved entirely through solid bedrock, winding for over 1,700 feet beneath the city. They routed the water from the Gihon spring outside the walls, entirely underground, into the Pool of Siloam inside the city defenses.
And they did it without compasses or modern surveying equipment.
Mind-blowing.
They started digging from two opposite ends, through solid limestone, following natural fissures, and somehow met perfectly in the middle.
And we know exactly how they felt when they did it, because archaeologists found the Siloam inscription. It's a rare piece of ancient Hebrew text carved right into the wall of the tunnel. It wasn't written by a king. It was written by the engineers.
Wow.
It commemorates the exact breathless moment when the two teams of diggers, exhausted and working in near darkness, suddenly heard the sound of each other's pickaxes swinging from the other side, and they finally broke through the rock. It is a monument to human desperation and ingenuity.
What is so fascinating about this entire crisis is the profound clash of worldviews. You have the worldview of the artifacts and the worldview of the biblical text. The Assyrian artifacts, the prism, the reliefs, they project a universe where imperial power is ultimate. Might makes right. The gods of the conquered nations are impotent against the war machine of Nineveh.
Sennacherib actually sends his psychological warfare experts to stand right outside the walls of Jerusalem and yell up to the people in Hebrew. He tells them, "Do not let Hezekiah deceive you. Has any god of any nation ever been able to save their people from the kings of Assyria? Your God will not save you."
But the chronicler counters that imperial narrative entirely. The text insists that military supremacy is an illusion. Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah cry out to heaven in prayer, and God responds. Sennacherib's arrogant boast is met by YHWH's sudden, devastating judgment. The text tells us an angel of the Lord sweeps through the Assyrian camp and wipes out their leadership and their mightiest warriors in a single night.
Unbelievable.
Sennacherib is forced to retreat to Nineveh in absolute disgrace, where he is eventually assassinated by his own sons in the temple of his false god.
It is the ultimate vindication of the chronicler's theology. But what I love most is the duality of Hezekiah's actions. He relies completely on YHWH for deliverance. He prays with agonizing sincerity, but he also digs a 1,700-foot tunnel through solid rock. Faith and wisdom, deep prayer, and gritty engineering, they aren't opposed. They are partners.
Exactly. Seeking God, Darash, doesn't mean passive, fatalistic inactivity. It means aligning your entire national life, including your infrastructure and defense strategy, under covenant loyalty, doing absolutely everything in your power to protect the people, and then trusting the holy God with the ultimate outcome.
Hezekiah proved the formula works perfectly.
But history doesn't stop. If Hezekiah proves that obedience brings miraculous deliverance, his son proves that the chronicler's theology includes an almost scandalous offensive level of grace. Let's look at what happens next. Hezekiah dies, and his son Manasseh takes the throne in chapter 33.
Oh boy. If Ahaz was a bad king, Manasseh is an absolute nightmare. It's hard to even comprehend the whiplash. Manasseh inherits a nation that just witnessed the greatest divine rescue in history, and he immediately, systematically undoes every single thing his father built. He rebuilds the high places. He erects altars to the Baals. He gets heavily involved in sorcery, divination, and necromancy. But worst of all, he takes carved idols and sets them up directly inside the Bayit, the inner sanctuary of God's temple. He literally turns the locus of divine mercy into a house of demons.
The chronicler's summary of his reign is chilling. The text says Manasseh seduced Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to do more evil than the pagan nations whom the Lord had destroyed before them. He is the architect of enormous, ingrained, systemic sin.
And so the covenantal governance kicks in. The formula demands judgment. The Assyrian army under a new king returns to Judah. And this time there is no miracle. The hedge of protection is gone. The Assyrian commanders capture Manasseh. And the text says they put hooks in him, bound him with heavy bronze chains, and dragged him away to Babylon.
We need to pause on that detail. Hooks in him. This isn't a metaphor. Assyrian propaganda proudly depicts them placing metal hooks through the lips or noses of captured rebel kings, attaching ropes to them, and leading them around like livestock.
That is horrifying.
It was the ultimate visceral degradation to be a king, the anointed son of David, and to be dragged 700 miles across the desert by a ring in your nose. I mean, it is the absolute rock bottom of human humiliation.
He is rotting in a Babylonian dungeon. He has destroyed his country. He has defiled the temple. By all accounts, his story is over. He is the villain. But then, the documentary filmmaker shows us a scene that changes everything. In his deep distress in the darkness of that dungeon, Manasseh does the unthinkable. He humbles himself greatly. There is our word, Kanas, before the God of his fathers. He prays, he begs for mercy.
And in one of the most shocking plot twists in all of ancient literature, God hears him. The holy, infinitely pure God of the universe is moved by the entreaty of the man who sacrificed children and defiled his temple. God forgives him. And not only forgives him, but orchestrates events so that the Assyrians release Manasseh, and he is restored to his throne in Jerusalem.
I cannot emphasize enough how scandalous this is. Manasseh spends the final years of his life desperately trying to undo his own damage, tearing the idols out of the temple, commanding Judah to serve YHWH. He tries to rebuild. Research notes from scholars like Chris R. Volatzis show that this is perhaps the most striking grace narrative in the entire Old Testament. It is a profound, screaming neon sign to the exiles reading this text hundreds of years later. Absolutely no history of sin, no matter how grotesque, is beyond God's reclaiming mercy. If Manasseh, the worst of the worst, can be forgiven, then you, the broken survivors in the rubble, can be forgiven.
It is a stunning dramatization of God's character, but while it creates a massive theological tension in the narrative.
A huge tension. Because I know how the story ends. I know the Babylonians are coming. A few generations after Manasseh, we get King Josiah in chapters 34 and 35. Josiah is a prodigy. He is the last great reformer. He is repairing the temple, and his workers actually discover a lost, ancient scroll, the book of the law, the Torah,
which had been totally neglected during the dark years.
Josiah reads it, tears his clothes in grief over how far they have fallen, and institutes a massive, sweeping national cleansing. He orchestrates a Passover celebration so spectacular that the text says nothing like it had been seen since the days of the prophet Samuel. Josiah is doing everything right. But then, inexplicably, Josiah goes out to intercept an Egyptian army, and he is shot by archers. He dies tragically.
Yeah, it's so sudden.
And almost immediately after his death, the entire nation goes into a terrifying death spiral. Just a couple of decades later, the Babylonian Empire arrives in 586 BCE. They shatter the walls, they slaughter the people, they burn the glorious Bait of Solomon to the ground, and they march the entire population into exile.
And that is the tension.
Right. If Manasseh's horrific systemic sins can be forgiven through a simple prayer in a dungeon, why does the nation still fall? Why didn't Josiah's massive, righteous national reform save them from exile? The moral calculus seems to break down at the end. Why does God show mercy to the worst king, but drop the hammer on the entire nation right after the best king?
It is a brilliant question, and it forces us to look deeper into how covenantal governance actually operates across time. We have to separate the individual from the systemic. While personal repentance invites individual mercy, as we saw with Manasseh returning to his throne, it does not magically erase the momentum of accumulated, systemic, generational injustice.
So forgiveness doesn't mean consequence-free.
Exactly. Manasseh's repentance saved Manasseh. But the cultural rot he introduced into the bloodstream of Judah over decades didn't just vanish because he said he was sorry. The idolatry, the shedding of innocent blood, the economic exploitation, it was baked into the institutions. Josiah's story reveals a hard, incredibly sobering truth. Outward reform, no matter how passionate, is not always enough to reverse terminal decline. Rediscovering the law was beautiful, but the law only exposed the absolute depth of the nation's corruption. It proved that the institutional structures of Judah were simply too rotten to survive.
The foundation was eaten by termites. You can paint the house all you want. You can throw a great Passover party in the living room, but the house is coming down.
The exile was an inevitable, necessary covenant judgment. The land had to be violently purged of its corruption so it could experience its Sabbath rest.
And so, the security camera footage ends exactly where 2 Kings ended it. The city's in flames, the screams of the dying echo in the streets. The long line of weeping captives disappears over the horizon into Babylon. It feels like the ultimate, final period at the end of a tragic novel.
But this is the genius of the Chronicler. They refuse to end on a period. They end on a comma.
Which brings us to the very end of the book, the literary hinge of history, chapter 36, verses 22 and 23. The author fast-forwards through the agonizing 70 years of Babylonian captivity and suddenly introduces a completely unexpected, massive geopolitical actor onto the stage.
Cyrus the Great, the pagan king of the Persian Empire.
The text is so abrupt. It says, "In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, and he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom. Cyrus decrees that YHWH, the God of heaven, has charged him to build a house, a bayit, in Jerusalem. And Cyrus issues an open decree to the captives. Whoever is among you of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him. Let him go up."
Let him go up. It is an open-ended invitation, and from a canonical structural perspective, this is a masterstroke. These closing lines in Chronicles deliberately echo the opening lines of the Book of Ezra, the next stage in the historical timeline.
Right. And we have to remember the order of the ancient Hebrew Bible. In the traditional Jewish ordering of the scriptures, Chronicles is the very last book. It is the capstone. So the entire Hebrew canon ends not with a final prophecy or a dramatic miracle, but with an open door. It ends with an invitation from a foreign king saying, "You can go back. The exile is not final."
But this does raise a fascinating theological dilemma. Throughout this entire massive book, the focus has been on the Davidic king. The heir of David is supposed to be the one who secures the minutiae, who builds the temple, who leads the people. But the climax of the book, the ultimate salvation from exile, is authorized by a Persian emperor who worships different gods. Why?
It really is wild. The people have been waiting for centuries for a perfect son of David to save them, and God uses a Persian bureaucrat.
It demonstrates the vast, undeniable, terrifying sovereignty of God. The Chronicler is showing that YHWH is not just a localized tribal deity bound to the hills of Judah. He is the sovereign over all human history. He can and does use pagan imperial power to achieve his covenant ends. The gods of Assyria or Babylon or Persia aren't directing the geopolitical map. God is.
And that decree from Cyrus, it isn't just about a literal geographic relocation. It's not just about walking back to the Mediterranean coast. If you look at how this text was received and interpreted by later generations, especially in the Christian tradition, this physical return from Babylon foreshadows an ultimate, massive cosmic return from spiritual exile.
The theological and messianic trajectories that the Chronicler sets up are profound. Think about the intense focus on the Davidic line. The Chronicler takes great pains to show how fragile that promise was. Earlier in the book, there is an incredibly tense crisis with Queen Athaliah in chapters 22 and 23. She usurps the throne and systematically murders almost the entire royal family. The Davidic line was literally reduced to one single hidden baby boy, Joash, who was secreted away in the temple for 6 years.
The promise hung by a single thread, but God preserved the lamp of David.
Yet, when the Book of Chronicles ends with Cyrus's decree, the exiles are returning, but there is no King David on the throne. The physical line of kings has ceased. The massive foundational promise made to David remains unresolved.
And an unresolved promise in ancient literature is essentially a massive arrow pointing toward the future. It demands a conclusion. In the Christian tradition, that arrow points directly to Jesus. He's the ultimate son of David who finally sits on an eternal throne.
Exactly. The New Testament consciously picks up every single thread the Chronicler left hanging. It's not just the kingship. It's the temple typology itself. We spent all this time talking about the Bayit, the physical building that Solomon built, the place where divine mercy intersected with human failure. Jesus explicitly applies that exact temple typology to himself. In John chapter 2, he stands in front of the rebuilt temple and says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up," specifically referring to his own body. He is claiming to be the ultimate Bayit. He is the final locus of divine presence and forgiveness.
And you see it with the Passover, too. We talked about those glorious, massive Passover celebrations led by Hezekiah and Josiah. They were these beautiful moments of covenant renewal where the blood of the Lamb averted the judgment of God. But they were temporary. The nation still fell. They point forward to a need for a permanent Passover. which is exactly what the Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 5:7 when he says, Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed.
The chronicler's intense fixation on seeking God, on the mechanics of repentance, on the sanctity of the temple, on the enduring hope of the Davidic king, it is all tilling the theological soil. It is building a robust, resilient vocabulary of hope that reaches far beyond the tiny, impoverished community of returning exiles in post-exilic Yehud. The author intentionally leaves the history unfinished, ending on that open-ended decree from Cyrus, because true restoration is an ongoing project. It was ongoing for the Jews rebuilding the walls in 400 BCE, and it remains an ongoing trajectory of redemption that ultimately finds its fulfillment in the work of Christ.
Man, that is just staggering. The sheer scope of this narrative is breathtaking once you stop treating it like a dry timeline and start reading it through the lens of that brilliant documentary filmmaker. You see the mechanics of grace and judgment operating on a geopolitical scale. So let's bring this all the way down to the ground. Let's talk about you, the listener. What does a 2,400-year-old physical therapy plan mean for you listening right now?
That's the real question.
We started by saying 2 Chronicles is a masterclass in surviving national collapse and avoiding the hollowing out of your institutions. This isn't just ancient trivia about Hezekiah's limestone water tunnels or the dimensions of Solomon's bronze altars. This text speaks directly, uncomfortably, to the modern human condition.
It is intensely violently relevant because human nature has not evolved past the temptations of Uzziah or the despairs of Manasseh. We live in an era characterized by institutional decline. We look around and see religious formalism, people going through the motions of the sacred while their hearts are entirely captive to the profane. We see the toxic pride of leadership constantly causing the collapse of communities, churches, and corporations. We see the overwhelming temptation to trust our own clever political maneuvering, our own wealth, our own technology, rather than maintaining a posture of humility and prayer.
2 Chronicles puts a mirror to our face and asks a very piercing question. Are we just inheriting empty religious structures, defending the architecture of the past, while internally we are rotting? Are we actively seeking? Are we practicing Darash, or are we just relying on the momentum of previous generations? It reminds us that authority divorced from holiness is a ticking time bomb. It warns us that our greatest successes will be the exact moments we are most tempted to usurp boundaries and rely on our own pride.
And yet, it simultaneously assures us that no history of failure is beyond redemption. It challenges any community that possesses rich historical heritage to evaluate their current spiritual posture. A magnificent cathedral or a proud national history means absolutely nothing if the people inhabiting those spaces have forsaken the difficult daily work of bending the knee.
You cannot detach power from purity. If you do, your institutions become hollow, and eventually the Assyrians or the Babylonians of your era will kick the door in. But I want to leave you with one final thought, something we haven't touched on yet, but that sits right beneath the surface of that open-ended ending. We talked about how the book stops abruptly on Cyrus's invitation, let him go up. The chronicler stops there because they want the reader to step into the narrative. But there is a massive psychological danger hidden in that invitation.
What danger?
Yeah, because when you survive the collapse of your world and you are finally given permission to rebuild, the overwhelming temptation is nostalgia. The returning exiles wanted to build a temple that looked exactly like Solomon's. They wanted the exact same glory, the exact same political dominance they had before the exile. But the entire book of Chronicles just spent 36 chapters proving that the Golden Age was deeply flawed. Solomon's era fractured immediately. Uzziah's prosperity led to leprosy.
Ah, I see. They were mourning a phantom limb. They wanted the past back, rather than accepting the future God was constructing.
Yeah.
Exactly. The chronicler ends with a comma, because restoration is not about perfectly replicating the past. The new temple they build is going to be smaller. It's not going to have the Ark of the Covenant. The new Davidic king isn't going to sit on a physical throne in Jerusalem with a chariot army. The mechanisms of the covenant are evolving. So if your life or your family or your community feels like it is in a state of post-collapse right now, if you're standing in the rubble of a career, a relationship, or an institution that burned to the ground, the invitation to go up and rebuild is not an invitation to build a replica of what you lost.
Rebuilding isn't about nostalgia. It is about taking the eternal principles, humility, seeking, turning, and constructing a faithful future that might look entirely different from your past. Are you trying to resurrect a comfortable illusion, or are you daring to become the architect of a new reality? That is the question 2 Chronicles leaves hanging in the air. The security camera might show you surrounded by rubble. But the blueprint for a new Bayit is right there in your hands. Humble yourself. Pray. Seek. Turn. The invocation is open. let him go up. Thank you so much for joining us on this massive deep dive into 2 Chronicles. It has been a monumental journey, but hopefully you're walking away with a completely new lens for reading this incredible ancient text. Keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep learning. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.